Hello, my name is Dennis O'Connor and I own this museum. It's a private collection. Welcome to Old Irish Ways Museum. These are some old oil lamps, oil lights. There was no electricity back in the day. Now here on our right we have a lot of old hay barn manufacturer signs. A lot of these companies are long gone. These signs were enamel and they really lasted a time. Most of those signs would be at least 100 years old. Here in front of us now we've got a selection of old fire bellows. They would have been by the side of the big open fires in the little houses in Ireland many years ago. This section in front of us now would be kind of old post office-y kind of stuff. On the right there is the old switchboard. Now back in the day you had no dial-up phones. The start of the phones was a wind-up phone like this one here. So when you wound that, it rang in the post office or the telephone exchange and the operator put you through to whatever number it was. That would have been prior to the dial-up phones. This here in front of us is a spinning wheel. After shearing the sheep, the wool would be, well, I don't have it, actually the carding machine is upstairs, but the wool would be put to a carding machine and that straightened the strands, and then it was put on the spinning wheel to make thread. This is our tea room, but I have got a selection of old whiskey watering jugs here. You wouldn't see them in many pubs today because they would be whipped, but you may see an odd one maybe up on the back shelf in a pub. But everything was about advertising back in the day, and as you can see, some of them were very colourful with the names of the different drinks companies on them. Shop. These would have been in all the villages or maybe out the countryside. No supermarkets, no trolleys or anything back in the day. You came in to get your groceries and the shopkeeper, you said what you wanted, he put it on the counter when you had whatever amount of stuff you were getting, and he would often tot up your bill on the corner of a newspaper. Some of the things like I was saying there earlier on, nothing was thrown away back in the day. People were poor, so everything was utilised until it was of no further use. Now, people would have bought bags of flour. Some of them would have been bigger than that now, and maybe a 4-stone bag. That's a 2-stone bag of flour. But when it was finished, people would have ripped the bags and made bed sheets or pillowcases out of the bag, so nothing was thrown away, everything was utilised. Everything came loose at the time then, like everything had to be weighed. So this was a tea chest, so you would buy a quarter pound of tea, a half pound or a pound of tea, and a lot of customers would ask the shopkeeper, when you're finished with that tea chest, maybe I can have it, and often there would have been a queue of people waiting for tea chests. Now they were used for different things, but one of the things that were used for was as a kind of a playpen for a small child. Now there would have been tacks or nails maybe around the top, so they often got an old worn tyre of a bicycle and would be tacked onto the top of it so that they wouldn't get damaged. They would also have been used to store firewood or peat, have them near the fire for the open fire, so nothing was thrown away until it was completely useless. There's another thing there, these are called pot menders. Now there would have been 2 steel washers and 2 rubber washers, and if you had a hole in a bucket you would put the rubber and the steel washer at one side and at the other side, and you put a screw down through it and tightened it, so you got more use out of your bucket. We'll just go out here now and we'll have a look at these. This is what they called the loose biscuit. It was a rack, and the different makes of biscuits would be in the boxes, and the shopkeeper gave you a bag, and you picked out so many custard creams or ginger nuts, and you mixed in your match, and he weighed your bag of biscuits, and a quarter pound or a half pound of biscuits that cost so much. They would have been in operation up to maybe about 1970, possibly not hygienic enough today. Now here in front of us we have the chemist shop, and back in the day most medication was in liquid form, so when you handed in your prescription, the chemist had to get his different bottles and make up your medication. Now here in front of us we have that the hardware store. So that was, you had nails or paint or anything hardware really. Now here we have the blacksmith, the forge. Now back in the day the blacksmith could have been classed as the mechanic because the horse was both a tractor and a car, because the horse pulled the old farm machinery, and he also pulled the trap or the carriage when people were going to mass or going shopping to the nearest town. So the horse had to be kept shod, so the maintenance man would have been the blacksmith. Now the blacksmith also made an awful lot of beautiful wrought iron work and repaired mowing machines and other machinery, and they also made the wheelwright made the wheel, but the blacksmith made the band to put around the wheel. Here in front of us now, lads, we have a large collection of different types of weighing scales. Presently, you go into any shop or any hardware place, you very seldom see a weighing scales because everything is coming pre-packed. But back in the day, everything had to be weighed: nails, sweets, tea, sugar, you name it. Everything had to be weighed back in the day because it came in just in big containers. Now, this is the dairy section. So back in the day, before the milking machines even, cows were hand milked. So and then the milk was put into these milk churns up on top there, and they would be taken to the creamery the next day. They would be taken to the creamery each day, and some of the milk would be the cream would be separated from the milk, and there would be a certain amount. Each creamery would have made a certain amount of pounds of butter, like these ones here, and they would have sale for X amount of that, and the excess butter then would have been put into wooden boxes, and these boxes weighed 56 pounds, which was a half hundredweight, and to make sure that it was exact, this pounder was used to make sure that there was no air pockets or anything in the box. Now, hospitals or maybe hotels or boarding colleges would buy a box of butter because it would last so long. Also, some farmers towards the back end of the year, maybe around September, when cows would be going back in milk, they might buy a box of butter, and that would take them over the winter.
Sorry, the first milking machine there?
This would have been one of the start of the milking machines in here in the corner. It was a mobile milking machine. It would milk 2 cows at the time. Some people would have made their own butter at home, so maybe this is what they call a cream settling bath. So they would fill that with milk overnight, and in the morning the cream would have risen to the top. They would drain off the cream and put it into maybe some of these glass butter churns and put in X amount of salt and make their own butter. Sometimes they would have used a bigger churn, and when the butter was removed from the churn, it might have been put on one of these. It was a roller that squeezed the water out of the butter. Up on top here, lads, we have a selection of old cast iron seats of horse-drawn machinery. They wouldn't be the original colours, I just painted them just to highlight them. And just in front of them there then we have the scuffler, which we were talking about earlier. And this was a plough, a barn plough. This is for turning the sod. And beyond it there we have the turnip seeder again and the drill cleaner. These were all pulled by horse. Carpentry tools. I would think there was more tools in the carpenter's trade than any other trade. Between planes, saws, racing bits. These were auger bits. There would have been a handle put into those, and that was for making the holes in the timber. This is an old wood turning lathe. This dates back to 1880. It's a treadle lathe. It was operated by foot. The pedal was brought up, and as you were pedaling then, the flywheel was fairly heavy. That kind of kept the momentum up and it gave you a hand to keep it spinning. Engineering equipment. This was a type of, there would have been a bigger handle went into that. It was a guillotine for chopping angle iron. This one would have been for taking a notch out of the angle, and if you were making doors or gates, and this then was to square them up, to square it up. This in at the back is an old treadle foot operated metal turning lathe, and there again you have the big flywheel that when you got it going, the flywheel kept up the momentum. And an old pencil drill. These were sharpening stones. That one was used for sharpening tools like chisels and things like that. This one basically the same with a beveled stone in it, but it was used to sharpen the finger bar blades of mowing machines and combines for cutting corn. And as you see, you had it was a beveled stone, so it done a left and a right of each side, and then you push the blade along. This here in front of us now, lads, is the old cobbler shop, the shoemaker. So most of the contents of this cobbler shop came from a closed down cobbler shop. There hadn't been a boot or shoe made there since 1974. The roof had fallen in on it, and the stuff was within a couple of days of being thrown into a skip when we acquired it. So it's a fantastic collection of old, of how the old cobbler shop worked. Back in the day, the hobnail boot was a big thing for farm workers, factory workers, and you can see the nails on the boot. It helped to save the sole and to give you grip, but they would have been pretty dangerous in icy conditions. But, I've only got one of these, and it's a child's one. I'd say it was never worn. So everything was, there would have been big families in Ireland, so the eldest child in the family usually got the start of everything, and then it was hand-me-down, so things had to last. Here in front of us, lads, we've got some old, there would be the plates off of the front of old pulpers that were broken, but the pulpers were used for chopping turnips and things like that for cattle, but they were old pulper plates, and these here are old name plates off of machines. Here in front of us on the ground we've got a pig trough. So the pig, they were called the Mexican hat because they're shaped like a Mexican hat. This machine here in front of us, this was a force cutter, force or chaff cutter. The force, you might know, it's a green shrub with a lot of severe thorns on it and yellow flowers, but they would pull them through that, and they would chop them as fine as dust, and it was mixed in the feed for cattle. Whatever ingredient was in it would stop the horses of getting colic, because if the horse got colic they wouldn't last very long. This here is a corn roller, so when you'd be feeding the cattle, the grain had to be broken down, otherwise it would just pass straight through and they wouldn't get the nutrients out of it. This machine was called a cake breaker. Now cake was it was a cheap feed for cattle. It came in bags, like kind of hundredweight. It wasn't very heavy, but there would have been molasses mixed in it. It would be kind of dense. So they put it in there, and the teeth of on the inside just kind of tore it apart, made it easier for the cattle to eat it. Here, this is a corn roller. Again, just to break down the corn before they fed it to cattle. This machine here, this is the pulper. These would have been on nearly every farm. So beet and turnips, they would have been put in there and chopped up and mixed with other feed for the cattle. And this is an old clothes mangle. Would have been possibly used in hospitals or laundries or maybe convents or boarding schools, where there would be a lot of clothes, and when they were washed they would be put through the rollers to squeeze them to dry them out. This Massey Ferguson tractor here, lads, my dad bought this tractor new in 1964. I was only 9 or 10 at the time, and it never left the farm. It would be very unusual for a tractor to remain on a farm for over 50 years. But as we got bigger and older, we had a lot of tractors. But that tractor was always there, and it was gone into very bad disrepair. So my dad passed on, and I said someday, I'll get it restored in his memory. So I eventually got around to getting it restored in 2007. And I got it professionally restored, and people saw it and said, why don't you take it to vintage shows and show it off. I didn't even know what a vintage show was. So I started going to shows, and I saw that people had little collections of maybe old carpenter's tools, household utensils, oil cans, old hand tools, and they were beautifully restored and presented, and I said, God, I'd like a little bit of that. But I never envisaged it was going to turn into this, so this is what an addiction is. This here, lads, is our collection of oil cans. Some beautiful cans there. There again, some of the 2-gallon petrol cans there, I would have painted those to highlight them. They wouldn't be the original colours. But they would date back to the 1920s up to maybe the 1950s, that kind of way. But as you can see, that everything today is plastic. So the tin, anything about oil is very collectible. And the graphics and everything are so gorgeous on them, like you won't get it on a plastic oil can today. This is a skillet pot. There would have been smaller versions of that in the little kitchens years ago. This one would have been maybe in an outhouse, where maybe small potatoes and stuff like that would be boiled for pigs and for fowl, and they'd be put a bit of bran or something in with them. They would be mixed outside in the house. This pot here next to it, this is a famine pot. This is the most serious piece that we have in the museum, because we have the history of it. This pot was actually sent to Lord Lucan's estate in Killala in County Mayo, and he immediately dispatched it to the workhouse in Castlebar, stating that he didn't want any peasants dying on his land. Real nice guy. But back in the day, all the people had to eat was grass, leaves. If they found a dead dog, a dead cat or a crow, it was put into the mix. That's all they had. We've a fairly serious collection here of hand-operated garden tools, and mostly that everything had a handle back in the day before mechanisation came in. This bucket up here, lads, this was for spreading grass seed or spreading oats. There was, back before the machines, it would have been broadcast by hand. The seed fiddle, and there would have been a sack attached to the top of the box, and the grain would have been put in there, and this operated like a fiddle. It's up too high for me there now to operate it, but it broadcast the thing, and it was possible to plant maybe 2 acres in about an hour with that. We're now in the old style kitchen, lads, with the big open fire. They would have been in all the little houses back in the day. Now the fire, I suppose the easiest way to explain it, the open fire, and that it would have been the engine of the house at the time, because it was used for cooking, for heating, drying clothes, and often maybe back in the day a sick animal would have been brought in and left near the fire. People had so little at the time is that if you lost an animal, it was a big loss, because people didn't have a lot of money. There is a selection of the type of stuff that would have been in the little old houses back in the day. This quantity of stuff wouldn't have been in any given house, but it's the type of stuff that would have been there back in the day. As you can see there, we were talking about the fire bellows downstairs where they go. It would be by the side of the fire like that, and the handle was wound, and that it gave a G up to the fire when you were cooking and that. And there would have been a dresser. It was a way of maybe place to put in the wire, but also to display it maybe a bit. There was no electricity, so you had the oil lamps, and you'd no fridges. So this was it was, some people called it a larder, more people would have called it a safe. No, there would have been mesh on the door there as well to keep out flies, but that would have been kept in the coolest room in the house, or maybe outside of the house, to keep meat and milk and fish or other stuff like that to keep it fresh. No televisions. So back in the day, maybe an odd house might have a radio, and they were operated by wet and dry cell batteries. Now the radio was seldom turned on except for maybe the 9 o'clock or the news at 9 o'clock, but the radio had to be right for Sunday afternoon, 3 o'clock for the matches, and you could have a lot of neighbours would gather maybe outside the wall of the house, and the radio would be put in the window so that people would hear the match. This galvanised basin, some of them would have been a lot bigger than that. They were used for washing clothes, and this was a plunger so that you'd up and down and to wash the clothes. Now they were multi-purpose. They were all also used for washing the kids of the house as well. And back in the day, it would have been the same water that was used to wash maybe 7 or 8 kids. This would have been as good as your ensuite got back in the day. It would have been a jug of cold water with the basin and the soap underneath, and you'd have a towel hanging there maybe. And
the piss pot.
This was your toilet back in the day. Had to be emptied next morning. This is our bar, lads. A lot of colourful taps in it. Some of those taps would be fairly old, and it's, well, there wouldn't have been as many taps as this, but it's just a display of taps that I have in the bar. There may have only been maybe just Guinness and maybe some other one. Other than that, it would have been bottles of beer back in the day. So, and the seats that we made here, we made them out of the seats off of old horse machines, so we just utilised them to make swivel seats out of them. Everything back in the day was about advertising any product that you were selling, that it be drinks, cigarettes, or machinery, or any product that was being sold. It was most of the advertising was very colourful back in the day. Here now, lads, and this is where all the cooking was done. The pots would have been hanging on a crane, and the crane was adjustable up and down. If a thing was over boiling, you just lifted them up. The kettle was nearly always hanging on the fire from morning until people went to bed at night time. Other than that, then the other pots would have been used for cooking and that. This, lads, is our old school classroom. Back in the day, the only heating that would have been in the classroom was an open fire, which the kids would have to bring in blocks of wood and maybe some peat or some turf. And the teacher's desk was always near the fire. Everybody else was frozen. You had to wear your jacket. There was no electricity. There were hence a lot of the old schools, if there's some of them still around today, there would have been big huge windows on them, so the glass, everything was cold, but the glass was there to let in the light, so you had no electricity. And the writing was done with ink, and you'd have a pen with a nib on it. So you dipped it in the bottle or in the little font for writing. So back in the day, everything in the classroom, it was kind of chalk and talk. You have a blackboard, and the teacher wrote things with chalk on that. Some the kids, you might have to write them down, or she was explaining things with that. And there would have been a lot of maps and pictures of wild animals, and the seasons would have been up around the walls of the school. And you had corporal punishment in the schools up to, oh, I don't know, I suppose it was there until maybe the early 1970s. So if you hadn't your homework done, you might have got so many slaps for it, or if you misbehaved, you got so many slaps. But corporal punishment has gone out of the schools now in a long time. This item here, this is an old clothes mangle. It would have been possibly used in laundries or convents where you'd have a lot of people, and it was for squeezing the water out of clothes. As you can see, most of the stuff back in the day, it was made so robust, it was made to last, not like some of the stuff that we have today. This is an old spike harrow. It's falling asunder, but it would have been used in the garden. It would have been used in the gardens. It would have been pulled by a horse or by a donkey, and it was to do the seed bed, you know, to break up the lumps of earth in the seed bed for planting vegetables and potatoes, etc. This is a hand-pulled garden roller. It would be to level off after planting the seed. These are two, they were called a winnowing machine. This one is a kind of dilapidated looking. This one is a bit better. Back in the day, before the thrashing mills and combine harvesters, the grain would have been cut with a scythe, or maybe with a horse and mowing machine, and the corn would be tied together into sheaves, and at a later date the sheaves were, to get the grain off them, they beat the grain off them with a kind of a sickle, or a kind of a, oh, I can't think of the name of it now. It will come to me sometime, but it was beaten on the ground, and the chaff would be mixed with the grain. So in order to remove the chaff, it would have been thrown in there, and that you wound the handle, and it blew the chaff off the grain, so you had the grain separate. This has been known as a corn drill. It would have been pulled by a pair of horses. It was for planting corn. This item here in front of us is called a zigzag harrow. There again it would be for loosening up the earth and making a seed bed before the seed would be planted. Also pulled by horses. And behind it here we have what they call a springtime harrow, for used basically the same thing for preparing the seed bed, and that would be pulled by horses. Now the machine we have here in front was a turnip seeder, so when the bed was prepared, this again would have been pulled by a horse, and it was for planting turnips and mangels, Swedes as some people call them. And the machine behind it here now is a drill cleaner, so when the weeds would start growing, it would clean the weeds off the sides of the drill. This was also, everything was pulled by a horse at the time. No mechanisation, no tractors. The first machine, the front machine here near us, was called a scuffler, and it was mainly used in potato gardens when the stalks would be about 6 or 8 inches high. You would break the sides of the drills down, and it was as the stalks got bigger, they had to be supported, and because the wind would break the stalks. So this would break down the sides of the drill, and this blue machine here, this is a double board plough. They used to call it heaping the potatoes, so that it would raise the drill up a good bit higher, that would support the stalks in the wind, that they wouldn't break. Because if the stalks broke, then your potatoes wouldn't develop properly. And the machine on the inside is the same, just a different company. It's another double board plough. Okay. This here then is the potato digger, and this was also pulled by a horse. As you can see, the blade on the bottom at the back, that went underneath the drill, and the spinner, it spun the potatoes out, so then they would have been picked by hand. This next machine here, some people would call it a thistle cutter. It was kind of for topping or cutting thistles in grazing land, and this would also pull by a horse. It was cutting thistles and weeds and that. This mowing machine now, the next one here next to it, that was a 1-horse mowing machine. It was a 3-foot bar, and it was used for cutting the crop for hay. The one next to it that we have here is a 2-horse mowing machine. It would be a 4-foot bar, and that would be pulled by a pair of horses. So back in the day, a pair of horses would possibly cut maybe 2 to 3 acres. Well, they would cut that much at the time. The next machine here is a horse rake, and it was for raking the hay together. People piped the hay into trams or wines, and it was left that way for a few weeks, and then it was drawn in. This then is the swart turner. After the hay was cut, the next day or the day after, the swart would be turned so that the crop could be saved before it was gathered up into wines or trams.